Gaurav Mehra. I work with a firm called Kaizen Private Equity. We focus on investments in the education sector out in India and Southeast Asia. So the panel today is about bridging the employability gap. As you know, in many emerging economies, also in the US, as we've heard over and over again through the sessions at the conference today, on the last couple of days, there's a significant gap between the average college graduate coming out of a college and their readiness for work and for the jobs that the companies have to offer. The problem is even more acute in emerging economies, where the quality of education or even the access to colleges is substantially limited. There are faculty problems. There's just not enough campus capacity to go around. And even when they are, the curriculum may be outdated, and it simply doesn't prepare them for real-world skills. And the level at that the average student is at, it may be so poor that even in the midst of large numbers of human beings available to work, the number of qualified candidates is so tiny. Companies are always in a war for talent. So we're faced with this odd paradox of a scarcity within plenty. And so to speak to that, the panel is here. I'll ask them to introduce themselves as we sort of hit each of them. Let me kick off with Monica right here. Monica, can you just give us, you're in the investment space again. You're looking across emerging markets. Can you give us some context on what you see in the employability gap?
Sure. So I represent Omidyar Network. We are a philanthropic investment firm that supports market-based solutions through non-for-profit grants as well as for-profit investments. Across education, I mean, we look at early childhood education, we look at K-12, and we do look at employability as well. While I sit in the India office and we look at global investments, in India, I mean, we have 300 million people in the workforce today, and we are considered by 2020 to be the world's youngest workforce. And we add 12 million of them every year to that workforce. And while the government says there's a 9% unemployment rate, I think it's much higher when you consider the unemployability in the country, which is significant because people that are graduating do not have the skills that match with industry needs. And so in that context, I think this is a huge problem that needs to be solved.
So very quickly, if we were to compare the average graduate, we just heard a lot, even in this conference, about even the average graduate coming out of college in the US today. Are they really ready for work? It sounds similar, but is there more difference? Is there a different set of unreadiness that we're seeing over there? Are their communication skills better?
So I think that, all of them graduate assuming that they have a certain amount of skill sets that can deliver at the workplace, and then realize when they need to be hired that they are short of skills, largely soft skills or communication skills, but to an extent industry relevant skills as well. So I think the traditional brick and mortar institutions are not being able to deliver the relevant skills needed for industry today.
Okay. Tuan, you're looking at Southeast Asia. You're really in the middle of solving a little bit of this problem. What's your perspective on what the problems look like over there before we get to solutions in a bit?
Okay, hi everyone. I am the founder of Topica EdTech Group out of Vietnam, and we're operating in 4 countries now: Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines. And our perspective on this is we actually have try to solve it with 3 different products. The number one is a online college degree, which nowadays only the entrance ticket to the job market. So we've been doing this for 7-8 years now, with 25,000 students and 11 universities. The second basic skill needed for employability is English languages. We studied that about 3 years ago, and now we have about 15,000 tutoring students. And then what we realized after this is that once you have these basic skills, then you have to keep upgrading with the individual skills and short courses. So that's the newest product that we launched about 6 months ago, a short courses platform. So it's become a lifelong learning rather than just go out and be comfortable with the degree you have for the next 20 years. So and I'm sure there are a lot of other complementary skills that will be required, but we're looking at solving them one by one in the future.
Okay, fantastic. So you spanning the whole spectrum now.
I would say that's 5% of the spectrum.
Okay. Yikes. Jussi, I'll turn to you very quickly. You have a perspective from Europe and Africa.
Yeah.
And speak to us a little bit about the problems you see there, as well as distinguish for me. There are different kinds of jobs. There's white-collar jobs, blue-collar jobs. Differentiate for me the readiness in all of those.
Yeah. So the past 15 years, I've been working in the African Middle Eastern context, and the past few years now in the employment space and education space. It's a very interesting market. If you look at the split we have there, it's roughly about 60% of the market is in informal employment. Many of them working in agriculture. And even then, of the rest 40, then a significant part of them are in sort of non-traditional Western type of contractual framework. So it's a very, very, very interesting space. Only about 5% of the market are in what we call white-collar jobs. About 15 to 20% then in blue-collar positions, and the rest then in either agriculture or informal space, as I mentioned. Similarly, also the education, of course, system is quite different than here. Only about 5% of the workforce has had higher education. About 20 to 25%, depending on the country, has had higher, let's say, high school level education. And these numbers, of course, are increasing very rapidly. But the starting point, of course, is quite low. If we look at we did a lot of research interviewing both employers as well as then job seekers, what kind of challenges they had when we were putting the concept of Fuzu together. And it was very clear that on both sides there were gaps. The job seekers themselves didn't really realize what the job market is about. We need to understand many of these people haven't been exposed to actually role models of people who have been working in let's say traditional industries, because it's a first wave of first generations doing that. Similarly, then, if you look at the skills that the employers were requesting, a lot of challenges there as well, principally because of the pedagogic approaches used by universities, a lot of rote learning, and very often also then the technical skills that are being taught are not a match with what the employers are requiring, which of course is a very similar situation in many other parts of the world as well. But I still say that the problem is slightly more drastic in the African context.
Okay, and Karl, you're bringing content to the world. What do you see as sort of the spectrum when you look across every type of country? 150 countries, I think?
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Karl Mehta. I'm founder and CEO of EdCast. We're a company based in Silicon Valley, incubated at Stanford University. We are a knowledge network solving the problem of knowledge gap, which is the root cause of skills gap, which is the main topic here. So in terms of the problem definition in the US here, what we see is that there's a fundamental gap between industry and academia. So the academia in the US is kind of, the whole infrastructure was designed in the previous industrial revolution, where you front load education first 24 years of your life, and then you're supposed to apply that education for the rest of your life. But now we have 50% of the workforce in the US is millennials, and they're predicted to have about 12 to 14 careers in their lifetime. So there's no way that the academia is producing the skill set or equipping them with the skills. And that's where we have a lot of skills gap problems. So, there's all reported in the press here. There's 4 million jobs that are getting remaining unfulfilled in the US for many years, coming from Silicon Valley, where we have so much demand for IT and programming and computer science. And in the US, we're not producing enough of those. And that's where we see all the stress and the friction around immigration, and we're taking a lot of people from outside. So there's clearly a skills gap. We see that in many other countries. We work with large corporates, and we also work with direct to consumer, and that's where we see with 150 plus countries where people need to keep up for their career progression. And there is no academia, there is no universities, there is no colleges that is designed for this new culture that is needed for lifelong learning. So maybe we'll get into the solution part later, but the problem definition is really around helping working adults to continue to skill up, reskill, and continue to learn.
Sure. Let me ask you a question. We talk about employability gaps, and we say, well, it's all missing. And it's like saying, well, the user interface could be better, and the taste of the food could be better. Is it very subjective? Is there a way to really decide when are you really employable? Is there a way to assess this? Somebody want to take that on? Monica, you have a company, I think, in that space?
Sure. So I think assessments are important because really it's important to define what is the gap. And unless you don't know what the gap is, you don't know. I mean, so there's the whole question of whether this can be done much earlier in K-12. But once you're already at that phase when you've graduated and now you need to get into the workplace and you have this whole gap. So Aspiring Minds, a company that we've invested in, has an assessment platform. Their primary assessment is called AMCAT, and it really helps the employers in a lot of different industry verticals, IT and financial services, BPO sector, etc., determine what the skills are and what the skill gaps are. And that also is for aptitude and personality, so as to see whether there's a fit for the culture of the organization. So it enables the employer to better understand which employees out of the pool that they have they could potentially employ.
Sure.
Yeah, it's actually a very similar approach what my company is doing. So basically what we do, we integrate into the application process a different type of tests that can be then tailored as per the needs of the employer. We see that it's if you look at the early part of the career applicants, of course, then it's much more about their growth potential and ability to, let's say, learn certain skills as part of their career along the career, and therefore, in those positions, we are mostly looking at their personal aptitude as well as then a basic starting point in maths or languages and so forth. Whereas then in the higher ranked positions, then it's very much about the personality profiling and the fit for the organization itself. As well as in certain cases also then testing the knowledge level in certain competencies like software sciences and so forth. The results have been very good, so I think that it's a solid mechanism. But we also need to realize that one reason why we need to do this in emerging markets is because the supply-demand in the market is the imbalance is so massive, meaning that we have thousands or tens of thousands of applicants for one single position. We had a case just a year ago in India where we had 1.3 million applications for one. Actually, there was a group of 150 positions by government, and the government estimated it's going to take 4 years for them to interview all the candidates. So that's one of the reasons why we need also mechanisms to screen the candidates.
Yeah. Let me ask a philosophical question, really, just speaking of that. So, as you know, more and more companies are bringing testing into the hiring process, and more psychometric and more job fit and what have you. Do the employers even know what they really want? Just for the hell of it, you know?
Yeah, I'd like to say that the HR departments know what they do, but very often the case, unfortunately, is that they don't.
Sure.
But it's still, if you do enough guidance, you provide them with enough instructions. Actually, our results have been pretty good, so they know roughly what they're doing. But in certain cases, we've seen also.
So education needed there as well.
Exactly, you need education there.
Yeah, but I wanted to add that it's not only for the employers, though. I mean, these assessment tests are also for students to gauge themselves. There's a huge B2C market, which is for students for themselves to understand where in that whole, skill spectrum the gaps remain, right? And then they can upskill themselves where they are found wanting.
Sure.
So our experience is quite the opposite, actually. And as an employer, I can speak to this. That we think that the employer assessment is far better than any academic rubber stamp. We've interviewed people who have computer science degrees from elite tier 1 universities, and when they come and do interviewing, they can't even code. And when our engineers ask them a problem to solve and write the code on the whiteboard, they can't do that. This is US tier 1 university computer science graduate. So in fact, as an employer, and we live in the employer and the corporate learning market, we put less emphasis on any kind of rubber stamp and assessment and some multiple choice question that you answered and you got some 78% right. This is all, pardon my language, BS, right? You come to the job and we give you the exact job specific stuff, and if you can help answer that question, you can write to me the solution on the whiteboard, you can show me how you would code it, that's the assessment.
Yeah.
What?
But I'd say that it's also a multi-phased process where you actually can do the initial screening by tests, and then you need to have the practical side in the last step.
Well, let me add to it. I think we have a mixed experience, so the middle ground of both. So we actually apply some of the behavioral interviews and measurement in our own hiring. So we actually hired 500 people last year, and it means about 10,000 interviews. So what we found is we're looking for 6 traits, and 2 out of 6 can be probably automated through online testing. So we are actually talking with aspiring minds about how to do that. Things like motivation, so aiming high, and ability to learn new things. There are other things that are unlikely to be able to automate, like integrity and toughness. So in front of adverse environments. And then in terms of skills, a lot of fast-changing skills like computer programming that we don't believe can be tested in any way. So the only way is to do a on-the-job testing. One way we try to do a early on-the-job testing is that we involve the instructors early into the teaching process. So they actually have a 6-month process where they're teaching those students, and based on that teaching and the exercises, they know firsthand about skills. And that solves another problem of emerging markets, is that people have an inherent distrust of any testing and certification. So they don't trust any certification. So by being on teaching a course for 6 months, you believe in what you see in a certain students, and then you will decide whether you want to hire her or not. Yeah. Okay. So that's a combination of both.
All right. Let me switch gears to different models being employed. Your companies, other companies you've seen starting to plug this gap innovatively, doing different things. Whether it's the problem of just teaching a sheer number of people, or business model innovation to make sure that stuff happens. You know, what's going on? Jussi, you want to start? You have an interesting model of your own business sort of closes this loop.
You mean the business model, or?
Well, just how you're closing the loop for the employability.
Okay, all right. So basically our proposition is to provide a pathway to employment for the job seekers, at the same time then also help the employers in actually finding the needle in the haystack. So essentially what we do on the job seeker side, we provide them with the ability to dream, which basically means playing with different career options, receiving career coaching online, and then to fill those gaps that you have in your skills portfolio. So basically grow to become the professional you want to be. And then the last step what we have is then finding new positions that match with your profile. So we actually do pretty complex algorithm matching based on your skills base, based on your education, your experience, as well as then even your personality profile. We do matching to the job opportunities that are out there. But then on the other side, all this data that we have of the job seekers can be then used in the algorithms to then match those candidates towards the requirements of the employer. So basically we fill the both. We fill the needs on the both sides.
Yeah. Other models you guys have seen that you want to talk about? I can throw a couple in.
You actually apply a opposite model. Yeah, so the opposite approach. So instead of predicting what will be needed for employability in a couple of years or a few months, our philosophy has always been to allow the students to start working first. And then while they're working, they know what they're missing. So all of our students are working adults. So in the job, they find out exactly what they're missing. So they go back and say, okay, I need this and this degree to start with. I need this and this in terms of language skills and in terms of individual technical or job skills. So we try to take a reverse approach to that. Okay. And then we believe that may or may not be the ideal model, but the advantage is that the motivation is a lot higher there. So they know exactly what they're missing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So we have a fundamentally different model in plugging the skills gap. So what we believe as a philosophy is that by the time you identify a skills gap and then try to do remediation by taking some courses, already too late. So we're going way early on and saying, you need to first plug in your knowledge gap before you get to the skills gap, because the biggest threat that everyone has about getting disrupted in your role is you don't know what you don't know. Okay, and if you look at even the millennials, it's even more prominent because they just don't know what they don't know. Right? So what we do is we put them into our knowledge network where they get to know a lot of things that they have never even thought about it. So it's not kind of all cookie cutter where you're saying, okay, here's all the skills and which skills you want to acquire, because a lot of time we've seen in the US, a lot of private online universities have made a lot of money by just taking money from all these students who have ultimately got nothing. They spend their time, they spend their money, and they got nothing because they don't get job. Ultimately, after spending $50,000, $100,000, they end up for a minimum wage job as a waiter. So it's important to change the whole paradigm and the pedagogy of not just jumping into, hey, here's a skill and promise you that here's the job for it. Just engage in some kind of a micro learning and understand different variety of topics and connect with peers in that particular area. And once you get there, you kind of start identifying what are your core interests. You see, the reason why you also get another data is that on the MOOCs platform, you see there's a 95% dropout rate. Well, it's not just that because the courses are free. Part of the reason that they have 95% dropout rate is majority of these people are clueless why they even signed up for that course. Okay? So you have this issue that people in general are really clueless about not thinking deep enough to say, what are my core interests, what I really want to do in life. They just go from one place to another and say, well, there's a job here and I'll frame my resume here and I'll take a course here, I'll put it on my resume, I've taken this Java programming course and I'll somehow show up into the interview. That's what is going on, even in developing markets, like when we are hiring in India, it's the same thing. You find out that they actually don't know anything about Java, but they have a certificate in Java, right? Or they don't even have a core interest. After you hire them, they say, actually, I just got into this job because it was hot and all that, it was interesting, but I'm not really interested in programming. Can you give me a program manager job? Can you give me a project manager? No, we hired you as a programmer. I can't move you into that. So that's the new approach that we are taking, which is more like what we call a whole new category around knowledge networking.
Sure.
And that fills that gap.
Yeah. Let me throw one more dimension in.
Yeah.
Just from, I was speaking to the gentleman who runs Daimler's, the Mercedes cars service network and the training in the service network out in India. They have a more interesting problem. It's not about, because the problem is a mechanic trying to service a modern car is no longer the guy that just turns the screwdriver.
Right.
He's got to deal with what amounts to a 5 or 6 computer LAN running inside the car. Everything's interconnected. It's smart systems. And the problem is there is nothing that prepares this mechanic for the degree, for that capability in country today. The average mechanic, the aspiration is just to be the guy that turns the screws. It's often C and B apprentice somewhere, and then sort of just start tweaking the screwdriver. And a degree earner, somebody who goes for a bachelor's degree, isn't going to do that job.
Right.
So you now have a job mismatch problem where the knowledge component of the job has become so high that you can't take somebody to that course. And that kind of stuff is beginning to happen in many, many, many more jobs, I think, is what we're beginning to see. So what we're starting to call the premium professional segment is a really challenging situation. You take, the dialysis technician in a hospital. This is not necessarily somebody that needs to have a bachelor's degree to go do that job, but it requires significant training, significant compliance readiness, significant safe practices. So how do you fill that gap? So we're suddenly seeing this gap suddenly develop for what used to be fairly blue-collarish jobs have suddenly started to turn into knowledge-intensive jobs, and trying to solve that problem is a difficult one. I don't think people are recognizing that enough. Just throwing content at this isn't going to do it. Yeah?
Well, you need a new color now. It's not just blue collar and white collar.
Exactly.
It's a
So
rainbow color. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're starting to see new models pop up there where people are beginning to take very verticalized efforts. So I was just going to ask the question maybe, obviously I'm starting at one end of it. So for these kind of situations, we don't think that just going online with content and sort of trying to plug some of these softer skills is going to work at all. So we're seeing just businesses coming up that are focused on sort of filling this gap, creating centers that provide the certifications, that go back to the skills councils to give it legal credibility and credentialing stamp. And we're seeing these kind of things just beginning to buzz now around nursing, around, again, specific healthcare workers, specific mechanics, and what have you. So that brings back the question of, what is really conducive to being taught online? What are the employability gaps you really can close online? And often on mobile online, because a lot of the emerging market is not desktop connected to sitting at a desk trying to learn. They're really just trying to learn on their device at best. Sure, go ahead.
No, so I think, I mean, personally, I think the hybrid model works the best. I simply think that in emerging markets, because of connectivity and also because of the certain kind of industry verticals that you're dealing with, it's hard to make it all online and enable the student to learn it and consume it completely online. And also, some of it is teacher-led, and you need a teacher intervention, I mean, for especially very specialized knowledge. So when I was talking about aspiring minds, they've got this whole motor skills test, right? Which you can, I mean, for automobile manufacturers, since you were talking automobiles. But that just solves a part of the problem. I mean, you still need them to, you know, for the skill gap to be addressed, to do some of it hybrid, which is partially online and partially offline. I mean, that's my sense.
Yeah, let me add to that. So we actually went through, experienced the same thing from being an employer ourselves. So we've been growing very fast in the last couple of years. So what happened is many people on the team, they started out with a particular job, but 6 months from now, they are doing something totally different. So I think the solution has to lie not only in what you train them, but how you set the initial expectations and attitude. So one of our hiring criteria now is actually ability to learn new things and willingness to learn new things. So so coming back to Daimler. So I think the real solution is they should not hire people who expect to be a mechanic for life. They should hire people who like mechanics and expect to do that for a couple of years, but are willing to learn something new, for example, computer programming in a couple of years. So they may not be a super great computer programmer, but at least they should be able to learn and to do a decent job.
Sure.
Right. So start with the attitude hiring.
Yeah.
Fuzu being a Finnish Kenyan company, so we rely quite a bit on the Finnish education system, and one of the interesting things about Finland has been that we've had a competence-based vocational education system in place since 1992. So basically, all the vocational education has been competence-based, and I know that for the US, there's a big transformation going now, about more than 20 years later. So we have plenty of experience on how you actually do that. And one of the critical things here, of course, is that learning a competence is partly knowledge, it's partly about that practical skill. So I'm very of the same opinion that it needs to be very often a blended approach. So training, the knowledge side of things, I think the online space works pretty well. Also, the other interesting thing, what we do, for example, on our platform, is that we can also then customize for the particular employer, let's say Daimler. We can then use the same online learning channel for their workforce only, which is then not open in the public space in a similar way. So you can use that knowledge element piece. You can distribute quite easily.
Sure.
So I think solving, particularly like the example you gave for the Daimler, in the US, in Silicon Valley at least, we've seen the leading example that this kind of challenge is going to be solved more by employers than by any other value chain. If you look at Cisco, they have trained more people in routers and networking and certified them as certified network engineers than any other institution. You know, if you look at Adobe, if you look at Microsoft, you look at Google has now invested heavily into programming, Android programming. So I think the employers are in a much better position to give you actually on the job and the cutting edge stuff that they need, and they're going to take the lead. I interact with academia here in the US, and actually they're not even interested in that because they love to treat themselves as the ivory tower and the sacred, and in fact they want to stay as far away from the industry so that they have the least amount of accountability, and they can say, well, our education is just about giving you a nice social experience in life.
Sure.
Just prepare you for life, that's it. So it's all about employers. Now the second part in terms of how to scale this thing through devices, I think the biggest thing would be virtual reality and augmented reality, because those two things will bring down the cost of actual learning things and building stuff, even in automobile or any example, in a 3D lab environment, because you could actually move your hands and say, I'm moving this part, and it will move that. You will see that in a 3D environment. So you would not have to go into a factory to operate an actual machine. You can see all the implications of that. So AR and VR is going to play a huge role in scaling that.
Yeah, I think you segued perfectly into the couldn't have asked for better, into the next part that we were trying to go to, which is really what's the role of academia or employer and in between and technology and business models as companies come up that try to plug this gap. So I think you answered it very, very well. Just out of India, however, what we're seeing is the employers are, especially the IT employers that are scaled enough, an Infosys or an IBM or a TCS, are actually taking elective courses back into colleges. They're building out the content, they're pushing them back as electives into the college system itself, and the colleges will offer this as an elective so the student can come out, pick it up, and be better trained as they come out. Daimler specifically is working with the vocational institutes, which are unfortunately very poor, providing them equipment, working backwards and upstream with them. Other corporations such as ITC Hotels have their own hotel management program, which is built to just feed them, but also feeds pretty much every top-tier hotel chain as well. So I think that sort of partnering model, I was just going to ask the question of, well, if you're setting up a business doing vocational training or you're setting up this kind of employability gap closure, do you see, how do you really play with the employers and the institutions that already exist? Are they competition? Do you play nice with them? Are they complementary? How do you, anything you've seen in your particular business models or around the models that you've seen around in place? Tuan, it's all you.
We love academia.
We're looking at you.
We love academia, yeah. So we try to work together with them, and the reason is it's hard enough to build a new startup and a new business model, and the least thing you need is to alienate people and fight, and there's always a way to partner, work together with them. I'll give you an example. There was some point that we were trying to decide whether we should apply for a university license. And there's some pros, and I think the biggest con was that it would put us into a competing position to our university partners. So we decided not to do it. And we can play nicely. We can deliver disruptive business model while still keeping them happy along the way. In terms of employers, they're absolute allies. So we have to work with them because that's the customers of our, the real customer of our business. Yeah.
Of course.
So in our case, we see them, of course, as a source of talent. So of course, because being an employability platform, we need new great talent on the platform. So that's a good thing for them, for the universities. Then because we can provide them with a channel for increasing their brand in the eyes of the employers, provide their student population with opportunities in the job market. So that's one thing. Secondly, then, of course, collaboration in terms of distributing their content. So that's the second one. With vocational institutions, a very interesting model being built currently in few countries where we are using the vocational education institutions as accreditation agencies for then the online learning piece. So they, of course, then are interested about the revenue shares for the individual users going there and getting their skills certified.
I'll throw out a couple models, Monica, if you have a couple that you want to add. We've seen there's a couple companies in India now that are working with colleges to bring in high-value new age programs as part of the curriculum. It's integrated into the college curriculum. So the offer really is you're offering a bachelor's in computer science degree. Unfortunately, your curriculum is dated. You're still teaching C. Maybe you move to Java, but you're not very far along. And they'll bring in a data science course as part of the curriculum. And so suddenly the student coming out has a bachelor's degree but is deeply into data science, which is a hot skill. And for that, these guys train the teachers. They do the deal with the college to bring the curriculum back in. The college can lift the fee because suddenly now that degree is worthwhile. It's employable. It changes the brand of the college. And we're seeing that kind of partnering model sort of begin to play out. We're seeing that on the finance, in the MBA sector. We're starting to see that. So either augmenting the curriculum or even beginning to bundle professional certifications in parallel with the degree program is a sort of new age model that we're beginning to now see.
So I think what I was going to say was something very similar. So firstly, from the student side, at least from an India perspective, students are still very much wanting a degree from an institution.
Oh, sure.
I mean, if you said it's just from some corporate or even if it was a company that was delivering it online, it would be hard for them to digest or even have to pay for it. So I think from that perspective, I still think institutions need to exist, just to be giving that degree. But yes, a lot of them are partnering with corporates and industry to ensure that the curriculum is updated. Also because they need to have placements, right? I mean, if their students are not getting placements into industry, then they have a problem in branding, exactly like you said. But I've also seen some universities increasingly coming to us that now are providing vocational training degrees. They call them vocational degrees. And these are micro certifications which can eventually lead to a degree. So each of those are like small modules that can give you certificates from the institution, but eventually can be back-ended into a full degree.
Okay.
So that's another thing we're seeing.
Yeah, so in effect, although the nano degrees, the micro degrees are showing up, unfortunately the degree wrapper remains aspirationally an important element in actually pretty much all of Asia, I would think.
Yeah, maybe a quick comment on that, how we deal with that in Finland now. So the latest education policy and legislation, how it changed this setup is that actually doesn't matter where you learn that particular element of that larger competence area that you're building, and you can actually then just go and certify it. So even if you've been working, you had taken online courses, whatever, you can actually then get the certification for the degree still. It doesn't matter where you acquire.
Yeah, we heard some very interesting stuff around credentialing like that, off-life experiences. You know, there was a lot of conversation just a couple of days ago in part of the conference here. But I think the problem is that in our parts of the world, there's that attachment to degree which has nothing to do with logic, yeah? So it's a change management problem that will take time to sort of sort through, unfortunately. Karl, let me challenge you a little bit. So,
Sure.
or please, if you want to comment, go ahead.
Well, no, so we work with both universities as our customers, and we provide them our knowledge network platform as well as with corporates, and we've tried to bridge the gap. And in the US, it's actually a very new thing. So the developing markets are actually far ahead at what you were talking about, like Infosys giving a course on big data to a university. Here, you'll not see many collaboration models successful. The only most recent thing is like ASU doing some training for Starbucks. That was like a huge deal because they've never seen this kind of things, that a company and a university collaborating. So we're still trying to get there, and actually that might be the south-north transfer of knowledge about how to successfully do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you before we.
South to
well, certainly the colleges are certainly more amenable. I think in taking in programs, wanting to work with employers. I think in our part of the world, they're definitely far more amenable. Let me ask the question. So as you look at employability, again, is it better to focus down on a few skills? If you're just broad-based content just flowing by, does that really help?
Are you from a student perspective or from a provider perspective?
Both of those, whichever end you want to take.
Well, so I mean, you know, the whole new model now that is emerging from an employability standpoint. Davos. January, I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and the main theme was the fourth industrial revolution and how it is going to transform the whole workplace. And I gave a talk about it this morning upstairs. Fundamentally, every industry is getting disrupted, and in that disruption, they've kind of created the top skills that will be. They've researched what are the top skills that will be required in 2020, compared to the top skills, which are the top 10 skills in 2015. And I won't go through the whole list, but if there is one skill set that has actually moved the highest number of notches, is creativity. So creativity is listed in the World Economic Forum website. If you go there, in 2015, it's listed as a number 10 out of 10. Mm-hmm. And for 2020, it has gone up to number 3. Right? So as these jobs, a lot of routine jobs are going to get automated with robotics and AI, and maybe a lot of this perspective is a developed country perspective. The fundamental skills that people will require is creativity skills, is entrepreneurial skills, because we are actually moving into the age of entrepreneurism where everybody has to be an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Whether you like it or not, you have to be an entrepreneur, because this whole concept of a lifetime job or even a steady career, this whole gig economy. I don't know if you read the article in Wall Street Journal last week about saying that the biggest spike that we had, the biggest growth that we had in 2015 was in the gig economy, mm-hmm. which is people just doing side gigs. So from a provider perspective as well as from an employee perspective, the number one skill that is required is creativity. So some of the soft skills like creativity and entrepreneurship is very, very important. And then the hard skill comes in, which is very specific to domain, and that gets further down the line. Like, if you're an automotive, obviously you need to have that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the proposition what you have in your platform. In our case, our proposition for the end user is that we can match and curate the content in such a way that your learning experience is always tailored for your needs and your career goals and where you want to go with your life. So in that sense, we could be offering, of course, huge amounts of content in the platform, but then make it very personal, so that then you only see the subset of that content that actually matches with your ambitions. So horizontal approach in my mind. Yeah.
So I kind of agree with Jussi, but also it depends on because we're talking employability, that's such a range, right? We're talking about 12th grade dropouts that can be there in India and in emerging markets, and then we have graduates. So you're talking about a graduate that you need to train for IT skills, and you're talking about a 12th grade dropout that might be being trained for retail shop floor. I mean, it can't be the same thing, right? So the skills and what you need to kind of do with them for them to get to that point where they can deliver on the ground is very different. So I'm just saying that it would be different.
Sure, you'd have to be vertically focused would be, I think, the contention.
But even one interesting thing, if you look at the African context, is that if we look at the most popular courses on our platform, there's a lot of courses related to just basic things like CV writing and so forth, but also then just basic working culture related courses are also very popular. So and things that we just see that are just let's say the things that everyone knows about, but we need to be training people on how to and when to arrive to work.
Sure.
You're not supposed to take the stationaries back home with you and so forth. So all this sort of
no,
things.
that's not right. Everybody takes office supplies home.
So,
come on.
Exactly. So it's very contextual.
Yeah. All right. So let me then the last few minutes. Let's just talk about very quickly. So if you're as you go from the developing world to the developed world, what can you take over? What translates over? And even developing world to developing world, what translates over? What crosses over? What can you learn from one side or the other? Let me set the ball rolling. My general contention would be that especially when you look at skills like IT skills, they're the same everywhere. And so if you built a model that works here to deliver that, the IT professional looks pretty much the same anywhere in the world, and they consume it. And so models like Galvanize or Burning Glass that are demand-driven analysis that says what are the hot jobs, what do they need now, and then build a course to sort of deliver that rapidly, certainly will work elsewhere as well. Provided somebody can see the link to how he gets the next promotion and the next job. As long as that link is visible to the programmer, I think it'll work. At the same time, we've seen the sort of reverse model where a Simply Learn-like company is doing training from India on a instructor-led or a mentor-led fashion from India with subject matter experts from the IT industry training programmers in this end of the world and playing the cost arbitrage. So the same courseware is one being delivered by technology going in that direction and by people in the other. Other trends you see, south-south, north-south, south-north. No, nothing?
I think that there's a lot to be learned from things happening in the south.
Sure.
Definitely. So just as much as there's things to bring from north to south. But as I mentioned, I've been working 15 years in the African Middle Eastern context, very much in the domain of setting up business incubators, accelerators, startup funds, and so forth. So there's a wealth of innovation going on, and we've seen, for example, the mobile money revolution everyone talks about is very clear evidence of that, but it's gone to many other directions as well, insurance policies and so forth. So interesting things happening there. Also the consumption patterns are quite different, which then impact on how you build your business models, and there's also actually interesting things emerging that could be applicable in the northern context as well. Then from north to south, of course, the pedagogic approaches and so forth, what we are deploying definitely are interesting in the southern context.
Yeah. Tuan, you're working across 4 or 5 different countries.
Yeah, I think
what plays well?
Yeah, in terms of north-south transfer, I think learning content is transferable mostly. There's some customization needed, but mostly transferable. I think what is not transferable is motivation of the people, the reason they're studying. In the US, for example, it's pretty clear to everyone that if you're highly educated, you make more money. But it's not that self-evident in many other countries like Southeast Asia. So what we need to do is to give them a very short feedback loop. So one single course they take for a couple of weeks, they're already increasing their income and skills and chances. And then they get appetite to go on and study. So motivation is number one. Number two is transparency. There's a lack of transparency there. So I remember when we started Topica, we actually did a study tour to open a university in the UK. And one of my first questions is how you manage cheating in the exams. And they said they have no idea. So they forgot how to manage cheating for 50 years now. It's something eradicated in the education system there. So I think we had to reinvent that and come up with ways to manage cheating and show transparency. And I think that's something that we may be able to transfer back to the North if needed, right, ever needed. And yeah, so things like this, motivation, transparency, so social issues and problems.
Makes sense. Well, we've got just about 9 minutes left. If you make it, have the audience have questions, you think? Unless somebody's dying to say something.
Well, on your last question, I think there's new pedagogy that is emerging here in the U.S. that is transferable. So we're working on a peer-to-peer learning or social learning, which is kind of very new, cutting edge here, which doesn't require any instructor because you're just learning from each other or you're learning from influencers, which is like the word from the social media world. What we used to call subject matter experts. So that kind of pedagogy that we're supporting in my company, we're seeing that it's very transferable, and people in general, I mean, human beings are social animal, so that social learning pedagogy is very much working in many parts of the world. And I think what we have learned from the developing countries, what you said about this collaboration model, like we've been working with a foundation in India, Wadhwani Foundation, and they've created great entrepreneurial courses, and they have integrated in 500 colleges all over India. And now when we're talking to universities and colleges in the US, and they don't have entrepreneurship courses because the people who are their faculty have never been entrepreneurs, because if they were entrepreneurs, they would not be teaching the colleges. So they don't have a model to teach entrepreneurship, which we are saying, well, we can get you outside entrepreneurs who are serial entrepreneurs, proven entrepreneurs, take these courses, and this is how you roll it out. So there is that kind of new models that are emerging in the developing market that's applicable here.
Oh, interesting.
And I think the only thing we haven't touched upon is that most emerging economies are very price sensitive.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of entrepreneurs have been able to bootstrap and come up with models that are really low priced and low cost across assessment and employability, and I think that is really something that's transferable across all of the emerging economies.
Maybe just give an example of like in our case, for an employee who runs a campaign on our platform, it costs $90 US to run thousands of psychometric profiling tests, talent profiling tests, and to get that crunching done. And if you think about then on LinkedIn, it costs 400 euros just to post the position without any analytics. So it's quite different.
Well, I'll leave it open to questions. We're at just 7 minutes to go. Go ahead.
It's a fascinating discussion, so thank you. I wanted to play up your point, Karl, about where does this actually play out in terms of online digital content? You talked about IT, but are there other verticals that scale globally online?
I'll take a stab. I think there are a number. We're looking at, I think what you have to look at is the content of that vertical to say which bits of it get put online, which may need some real world intervention. AR, VR may change even that equation. I think Karl is right. In certain areas, it'll change that equation even. So where it's primarily, it's a topic that can be read online, learnt online, mathematics, computer programming, what have you, very amenable to being online. It is an online technique. But you take nursing, but then you take Relias Learning's model, where you're doing a certain percentage of the courseware online, but then they've created a network of labs that are near you that you could go out and do your clinical end of it. So that allows you to scale those models as well. So you have a consistency of delivery, and then you have certified partnerships for scaling those bits out. So I think you really have to think through what you want to, how you want to do this stuff. And I think it's open. I think it comes back to, as Tuan said, the problems you've got to solve, at least for our end of the world a little bit, is will people give it the same level of credence to go online and take that course? Will you hit the price point they need, and will the employer recognize it if they go through that? If you hit those three things, I think you'll typically be successful if you've got the pedagogy figured out.
Maybe add one more thing. So if you look at the typical MOOCs, so for example, in the Western context, the challenge is that if you take a Coursera course, for example, it takes about 2 gigs, 1 to 2 gigs of space. And if you look at the bandwidth, what most of our users have available, it just doesn't work. There's no way for doing that. Second thing that is also quite interesting is that most of the content is applicable, but then for example, we have several cases where, for example, let's say a course dubbed in South African English is not understood in Kenya, is not understood in Nigeria. A course dubbed in US English is understood nowhere. so it's quite interesting, even though everyone is native English speakers. So it's
other questions?
When will ever, okay, going back to what Karl said, right, where you have on the one side academia, and then on the other side, which is employer-led, right? I remember this conversation with a friend who actually, we were talking about this app, whereby Robert De Niro or people like Kevin Spacey get to teach acting, right? So you would recognize, say, a student of Kevin Spacey, right? Back to what you mentioned about Daimler, right? Where the engineers, they have to teach something that's relevant rather than, let's say, a pure engineering school. When will it move to a point whereby it's less institutional reliance, say, in terms of the title of being the school that you go to, whereby the recognition is actually to the instructor. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, so
you see, like 10 years, 20 years, 30
right.
years?
So if you look back the 400-year history of universities, right? I mean, essentially, they have tried to maintain a monopoly to keep that rubber stamp of the university because that's what they control, right? Because the instructors, they put them on tenure and all that so that they can hold on to that and give them that safety net and security. But essentially, they're just a rubber stamp. So we should have been already 400 years back what you're talking about today, but we're not there, which is
2,000 years Confucius.
Exactly. Exactly. So I mean,
guys.
the country where I come from.
Sorry, Karl, just to play. 15 seconds to do 2,000 years of history. So
and you know, in the Indian culture where I come from, 5,000 years back, if you ask someone that, where did you learn this, they would not. There were institutions, but they would always talk about their guru, okay, the teacher. And the teacher had a bigger premium on his or her brand as opposed to the institution. We're getting there now, full circle, right? So if you look at Coursera and the reason why they've all become grown up and as successful, at least from attraction standpoint, is because people are going after the name of the person who's running the course. Because you're not getting any kind of credentialing. The credentialing is coming from Coursera. That doesn't matter. And you're not getting Harvard is not giving you a credential, but it's the Harvard faculty. So I think we are on the path now to get there. And as we more and more we become like, the instructors are going to become the core influencers. They're going to become the inspirers. They're going to become the mentors. And my son, who is at a private university here in Southern California, I won't name the university, but he came for the spring break. He's a sophomore, and he came home for the spring break, and he said, "Dad, I want to drop out." Because I said, "Why? We're paying like $50,000, and you're in a good school and all that stuff. And you're getting nice retreat type campus to enjoy life, and you're partying and all that stuff." And he says, "Dad, this whole university thing is I've tried it for 2 years. It's just waste of time, waste of your money, and I don't care about this degree because I don't need this rubber stamp. I know what I want to do, and I will be successful in what I want to do." So, but he says, and if you want me to learn certain things and I want to learn certain things, he says, I've identified people from whom I want to learn, and I'll take that courses myself. So it is the next generation. I think the previous generation, we all felt that without having that degree to show somebody with a parchment and with a rubber stamp, we would not have a job anywhere. But the next generation is getting there, and the industry is changing too. I mean, I have engineers that I'm hiring. I don't care whether you have a bachelor's degree from Stanford or from some certificate from De Anza, none of that. If I interview you and if you can code like a rock star, you're hired, you know, at almost the same salary as a Stanford computer science grad.
But you'll be probably the 1%.
So
Well,
no.
we'll
So
get
guys, so last question. I think somebody had one there, and we're pretty much out of time. So you'll have to ask it very quick.
Sure, I'm involved in vocational education here. It's very difficult to get students to take vocational education.
Sure.
Societies, I go to college in Visa.
Yeah.
Is it different, I'm assuming, in the emerging market where people are far more receptive?
Can I just make a quick comment? We'll just finish and then we can go offline. I think the problem in a lot of these situations is no different than an electric car. It's a system. You can't just drop an electric car in if you don't have, you know, battery and charging stations all over the place. And if you can go only, you know, 20 miles and then there's no station, you're screwed. So it's the same sort of problem. If we have great vocational programs but the employers don't recognize it, then the students don't see any value in taking it. So we've got to somehow square that circle a little bit, I think. And once you manage to do that, then it works. So the moment the economy shifts to people having short stints, and people are hurting for hiring the best talent, I think the motivation sort of, you know, just starts moving correctly. Yeah.
Let me add something very quick. It's the same in Vietnam, except for vocational diploma for software engineers. They're making much more money than the other guys, so it's very prestigious.
All right, folks, we'll have to, I think we're done. Thank you very much. Thank you all.